Good evening, explorers. I'm Explorer Torie, and welcome to another Native Nevada Nature. With me today, I have a special guest. Would everybody give a round of applause for our wonderful Explorer Brandon? Explorer Brandon, thank you for joining us today.
Hey.
So, if you're new to this, each week we do a presentation to highlight one native Nevada plant or animal species. So today we are going to be talking about the Bristlecone Pine. But before we begin, we have a poll for the next animal spotlight. So explorers, I don't know which animal to talk about next. Each week we talk about one plant and then one animal, one plant, and one animal. So I need your help, explorers, picking the next animal spotlight. And we have these four to choose from. You'll either see a poll on the Facebook page or you'll see it on the comment section. So just comment with your favorite type of animal. We have first Ichthyosaur, the great reptile that roamed the world when we were underwater. That is our state fossil. Greater sage grouse. If you saw our presentation on the sagebrush, you probably saw a video of these great guys doing their mating dance. The bighorn sheep, classic mammal of Nevada. It is our state mammal, of course. And last but not least, we have the Lahoten cutthroat trout, one that I kind of threw in there as our state fish. So go ahead and pick whichever one's your favorite, whichever one you want to know more about, and let us know your thoughts. And by Friday, we will let you know which one will be featured next week. But for today, we're going to be talking about the Bristlecone Pine, Pinus longeva. Now, the Bristlecone Pine is known by many names, also by the Great Basin Bristlecone Pine, Intermountain Bristlecone Pine, and the Western Bristlecone Pine. But all of these are part of Pinus longeva, which Pinus meaning pine, and longeva meaning ancient or aged. So it literally means long-lived or ancient pine. The bristlecone itself comes from the name of the immature purple pine cones. They kind of are incurved a little bit, and they're very bristly. So they don't stay purple like this in this picture, but they do stay pretty bristly. So Explorer Brandon, why don't you tell us some cool facts about the bristlecone pine?
All right. Well, so this is one of the coolest trees that grows in the Great Basin. So, number one thing is it's one of our state trees. The other one is the Pinyon Pine tree. Definitely an interesting plant. Nowhere near as cool though. This is one of the oldest organisms on the planet. Single organisms on the planet. There are some plants that clone themselves, so they're technically older. But bristlecones have the oldest single organisms in the world. Yep. Another really interesting thing is they only grow in terrible soils. Really rocky, really acidic soils where most things don't want to grow. And because of that, they're one of the toughest trees on the planet. So tough, in fact, that their wood doesn't rot like a tree normally would. It weathers away due to wind erosion.
Wow, that's awesome. Explorer Brandon, it's also one of our state trees, isn't it?
Yeah, did mention that, I think.
And our other state tree is the Pinyon Pine.
Mm.
Well, how do we identify this in the field?
All right, so let's start with the easier bits. So, unlike normal pine trees, they don't grow in big stands of trees with each other. They grow in fairly wide, spaced out groves. So, if you look at the picture on the left, there's lots of space between pinyon pines. When you're trying to identify these in the wild, these trees only grow at very high elevations, right at the edge of where trees can grow. If you get an opportunity to see one up close, easiest way to tell the difference between a pinyon pine and a different kind of pine tree is looking at the branches. So bristlecone pines, the needles grow in bunches of 5, and unlike, say, the pine tree that grows in your neighborhood, the needles grow all the way down the
branches.
The tree all the way down to the trunk. So when you see them in the wild, they kind of look like bottle cleaners.
I got a picture of a bottle cleaner for reference if you're like me who didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
So I know we have two different types of bristlecone. Explorer Brandon, would you let us know how to tell the difference between the two?
Yeah. Biggest difference between the two is going to be looking at the pine needles. Bristlecone pine has the little tough needles. The Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, similar thing, but the needles are tipped in pine resin.
Hmm. Pine resin.
Yeah. So if you ever touched a pine tree and you get the sticky sap on you, same thing. It just appears on its needles because of some uniquenesses in the way that they grow.
Interesting. And that's what you can see in these picture right here. These are the white flecks.
Hmm.
Cool. Well, Explorer Brandon, where can we find this in the wild?
All right. Well, in the Great Basin primarily. So if you look at the image on the left, um, the little purple patches are mostly in the high altitude mountains around the state, um, and you do see a bit of them growing in Utah and some of the high altitude peaks there, but they're mostly endemic to the Great Basin and with a little bit of spillover into Utah.
Cool. Well, if you guys ever get a chance to travel the Great Basin, hope you get to see these wonderful plants. But let's go over the timeline of a bristlecone pine. So bristlecone pines are monoecious, which means they all have male and female reproductive parts. They both produce seeds and pollen. They start out with seeds and pollen. They get distributed, the pollen by air and the seeds by birds. Usually, the Clark's nutcracker is a famous bird that helps disperse these seeds out. As you can see from their stands, they're pretty far out, so they definitely need the birds to help disperse those seeds and get them germinated or to start growing. Of course, they live in these terrible conditions, very high elevations, very low grade soil, so it may take a few years for them to be able to produce seeds and to be able to germinate and grow into mature trees. But once they get settled, it'll take about 20 to 50 years for them to mature and be able to produce their own seeds. But once they get settled, once they get past those irregular soils and start germinating, oh man, these trees are very long lived. As Explorer Brandon mentioned, these are the longest living single individual plant or species in the entire world. Their stands can be made up between seedlings, mature trees, and these ancient old trees. And the way that they survive so long is they are able to kill off essentially part of their own wood. So the part that's left dead is called deadwood, and it's basically skeleton remnants of what the tree was. The inside middle part will be alive and will be there for them to be able to carry water, be able to still produce leaves and photosynthesize, but the rest of their body is essentially dead wood. It's pretty cool. Now, Explorer Brandon, why don't you tell us about Prometheus and Methuselah?
All right. So those are the two oldest trees in existence, that are both members of the bristlecone pine species. Uh, Sorry about that. Methuselah, which is the oldest tree currently, was last dated at about 5,000 years old. And Prometheus is about 4,800 years old. Both are in the Inyo National Forest, just across the California border.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Their exact known location is kept unknown so that nobody would chop them down because there have been other older trees observed, but those are currently the two oldest living trees that are still alive that haven't been cut down or toppled over.
Yep. If I recall, the oldest member was about over 5,000, but they accidentally killed it when they took the ring sample.
That is correct. So they want to try to preserve these wonderful ancient trees as long as they can. So now they keep their identity secret, and only the scientists that are studying them know their existence. Now, Explorer Brandon, I know you had some fun facts about their outside of their wood. If you want to share those.
Well, yeah. I think I kind of alluded to this earlier. It's part of what makes it such a long-lived species is the toughness of its wood. Um, it is the arguably the toughest wood in existence. Um, it is incredibly dense and full of resin or tree sap. Um, so ordinarily, it's almost impossible for these trees to really gain significant injuries. Um, and they're so tough, in fact, that if a tree dies, it can stay standing in the environment for hundreds of years as a dead tree, which is almost unheard of when it comes to plants.
Yeah, which brings me to my next point, the bristlecone pine conservation status. So they are currently listed as least concern. At first, in 1990s, they were put in as vulnerable or threatened because there was a special fungus that was found on the bristlecone pine that was thought to mess up their population status. But as Explorer Brandon said, these guys are tough wood, literally. They've learned to weather through many different types of threats, and so therefore their population is currently least concerned. They are having a stable population, and there's no current signs of populations decreasing. That doesn't mean that there aren't threats out there, so I'll go ahead and talk about them. The first one is fire. So these guys can handle low to moderate severity fires. The dead wood will burn and leave scorch marks, but as long as the inner wood is not damaged, these guys will survive, thrive, and even disperse more seeds. So you can see in this picture right here, this guy just got a little bit burnt, but he's still kicking. Next up, we have invasive threats. So the Great Basin bristlecone pine is very vulnerable to different types of parasites. A couple of them listed that have been found on these trees are the bark beetles, mistletoe, mountain pine beetle, white pine blister rust, and go on. All these threats infest the bristlecone pine. However, since these guys are so long-lived and slow to infection, they pretty much just are so durable, they live it out and survive past through it. So that seems to not be a huge threat currently to the bristlecone pine.
But Explorer Torie, quick question for you. When you say mistletoe, do you mean the Christmas plant?
Well, kind of. Mistletoe, in terms of the Christmas plant, is actually a parasite. It lives off and feeds off of other organisms, taking away all of their nutrients. So this mistletoe gives less feelings about Christmas time than it should be in the wild. So it's a dangerous plant, and it does infect the bristlecone pine.
Well, the more you know.
The last threat is wood or logging. So the bristlecone pine was harvested and logged heavily in the 1800s. As Explorer Brandon said, their wood is incredibly durable, and that seemed commercially feasible back in the 1800s. However, these guys live in so high elevation, and their wood is almost too dense to be useful in multiple applications, and therefore it seems to be no longer commercially important. So that doesn't seem to be an issue in terms of their population. Of course, these are always potential threats, and these threats have a way to be exemplified and increased through climate change. So climate change has a chance to increase fire happenings and the intensity of the fire. Climate change also increases the infestation rates of these fungi, these parasites, these beetles that harm our poor bristlecone pine. And if temperatures change, it may prevent birds from carrying their seeds to different locations. For instance, the Clark's nutcracker is so important in seed dispersal. If it suddenly does not live in that environment because it's too hot or the climate's changed too much, the bristlecone pine will have a harder time getting those seeds out to be germinated and to grow properly. So always to consider climate change and effects on what the environment can happen in the future to each of our species that we talk about. But Explorer Brandon, I think that's all we have to talk about in terms of the bristlecone pine, right?
Yep, I do think we have a video though, right?
Yeah, we have a video playing right behind us. This is just a small showcase of some bristlecone pines in the wild. It's pretty cool to watch. Of course, if you want to get a actual preview of some bristlecone pine that's not too far away, if you're in the Las Vegas area, definitely go check out Mount Charleston. I think there's actually a trail called the Bristlecone Pine Trail. Correct, Explorer Brandon?
Yep, if I recall correctly, it's off of Kyle Canyon. It's a moderate hike. If I recall, it's about 8 miles round trip. Maybe a bit longer. It's been a long time since I've been up there. But it's a moderate hike, so prepare for a little bit of work if you go.
Well, cool. I hope you guys can get out there and see this magnificent tree. And I bet you it's probably older than you are. Explorer Brandon, why don't you talk to us about the maze?
All right. So we do have a maze this week's activity. I'm going to be starting at the top and making your way down to our ancient Bristlecone Pine. You can find it on the Facebook post to download it and do it at home once our stream is done.
Exactly. And we still got the poll up, right?
Yep, we're still taking suggestions for what to do next week. You should see a poll either down in the comments for the stream or as a post on our Facebook page right after we're done.
Perfect. All right, so we're just going to open it up to questions. We are doing this live, and I know some of you have questions about the Bristlecone Pine or maybe things around it or in general. So if you have any questions, go ahead and just post them or comment them on our video, and we will see if we can get them answered to you before the end of our video.
All right.
So Explorer Brandon, when's the last time you saw a Bristlecone Pine?
Would have been about 22, give or take. Actually, I went to the Bristlecone, the ancient Bristlecone Pine Forest out in Utah.
Wow. Let's see.
All right. Any questions rolling in?
Nothing yet. I got a comment saying that we got some good feedback on the graphics and the activities that are going on. So if you haven't already, go ahead and you can like or say you're going to the Facebook page for Native Nevada Nature. We will be posting all updates and activities that happen each week and reminders for each of the Native Nevada Natures that happen each Wednesday at 5.
Oh, Explorer Torie, we did have a few questions. One of them is, our Bristlecone pines edible? Much like pinyon pine trees, the nuts inside are technically edible. They don't taste very good though.
Yeah.
They're really, really bitter.
Yeah, and for most pine trees, almost all pine trees, the pine nut is edible, but it only comes out in certain seasons, and when the cone is just out of maturity and is opening up, pine seeds will either fall off or stay on, kind of intact. But usually they are too small and not worth your time to collect unless you are either really hungry or you really need some source of nutrition.
Yep. I think we had a question about the size of the Bristlecone pines. So I know this depends a little bit on exactly where the tree's growing, but they're usually about 5-6 feet, not feet, inches long. Sorry.
Cool.
So about the size of the pine cones you'd find in your neighborhood. They just won't be as wide. They're usually a lot longer than they are wide.
Yeah, but they're pretty standard looking pine cones.
I think we did have a geography related question. Is Deadwood, Arizona named after the Deadwood and Bristlecone pines? I'm not sure. Explorer Torie, do you have any
information on that?
Yeah.
I've actually never heard of Deadwood, Arizona, and there are other trees that do the same thing, where they kind of die off part of their trunk or their branches to conserve on energy. The Bristlecone pine just does it very effectively, enough to where they can live thousands of years. So I'm not exactly sure, but we could definitely look that up and give you the answer after this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But my guess is no, because I don't think at least this type of bristlecone pine is not really located in Arizona. If I'm correct, Explorer Brandon.
There are a few pockets that exist in Arizona, but it's in the Rockies in the far northeast of the northwest of the state. Not quite where Deadwood is, or Tombstone is the name most people know it as now.
Okay. Next question we have is, what are some species that can harm this pine? So I already kind of mentioned in the conservation status, I had a slide about the bark beetle, which is a beetle that basically infests and pretty much kills off a bunch of different pine trees throughout the western United States. It's a huge problem, but there's other like fungi and parasites like the mistletoe fungi, like white pine blister rust. In terms of species that aren't just small single-cell organisms or insects, these guys are pretty hardy creatures because they have to survive on such harsh, different soil. Once they get pretty much established, they're pretty much here for life. So I can't think of anything on the top of my head that would actually affect the species more than those different threats.
Well, Explorer Torie, I think you mentioned this. There's not a species that could harm the tree per se. There is one type of nutcracker that does most of the seed dispersal for bristlecone pines in the Great Basin, called the Clark's nutcracker.
Correct.
Right now, that particular bird isn't under any threat, but if things change and that bird does become threatened, that could end up being a major issue for the bristlecone pine.
That is correct. This is very dependent on other species dispersing its seeds and getting it germinated. So it's not a loss with the Clark's nutcracker, but it would be a loss if the Clark's nutcracker was not there to help keep their populations.
Exactly.
But as far as I can see, we don't have any other questions. Is that correct, Explorer Brandon?
Yep, it's looking pretty clear.
Cool, but if you have any further questions, if you are watching this not live, you can always post them and comment them on this video, and we will get back to you with knowledge and research. But until then, make sure to tune in every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Facebook Live for Native Nevada Nature, where we will spotlight and highlight one native plant or animal species. Next week's is going to be a mystery, so go ahead and vote and share us your thoughts. But until then, keep on exploring.